Hey YouTube, Gate here with the Promised Gear Guide. I'll start with the basics like where to get gear and then go into detail what you should expect from your gear and what to do to min-max for endgame. If there's a section that you feel like you already know, feel free to check the timestamps in the description below and skip to the parts relevant to you. Let's jump straight in. Acquisition sources. Here I will talk about where to get certain pieces of gear and go a bit into the future of CN up to the 2.2 patch and show you guys what you can expect from future content gear-wise. Let's start off with the basic 8 pieces that you all should be familiar with by now. These pieces you can get from opening chests inside joint operations, with each chest costing you 30 vitality. Just know higher level joint ops do have a better drop rate, and according to data miners, the last chest also has a higher drop rate, which means if you want to be efficient with vitality and your double drop rate joint supply chips, only opening the last chest is the way to go, but obviously this will cost you more time. Other sources include Frontier Clash, either from a drop or from the chest at the end screen. Just know that if you don't have attempts, you will not be able to receive drops. There's also the Dust Shop, where you can and should just spend your gold dust for gear, but maybe save the purples for now, since on CN there's a purple dust to crystal chunks conversion, but I highly doubt that it will come to global since gear XP costs already been heavily toned down. You can also get gold gear from opening the password chest with chips, but please don't. The drop rates are abysmal, and you should be saving the chips for opening in Vera instead for the potential additional gacha machine currency. Now, let's take a look at the future for new pieces of gear to come. A lot of people are wondering if gold gear is the endgame and could there potentially be red gear in the future. In my opinion, no, there won't be, since it does seem like in CN at least, they have been releasing new pieces of gold gear with each major content update, instead of releasing a higher rarity of gear and validating current gold stuff. There are no guarantees that this trend will continue, but it is the trend for now. The first new piece of gear is the combat engine, which can first be acquired from doing raids. The combat engine can be acquired from raids in CN, either as a super rare drop in heroic mode, or from the shop using this new currency, which you can also get from doing raids. This piece of gear and every upcoming piece of gear will be elemental specific and has a chance to contain powerful substats like percentage elemental attack or damage, which we will get into later. Next, we got the Tactics Eyepiece in the 2.0 Vera patch, which only drops from the 2 Vera world bosses when you use the new Vera specific golden cipher chips, along with the same raid currency that allows you to purchase the Eyepiece in the shop. This eyepiece has crit as a base stat, and substats can contain flat crit percentage and percentage elemental attack. In the 2.1 patch, we got the Micro Reactor, unique to the 2 world bosses in the Abyss, with one boss having a chance to drop elemental micro reactors or their fragments, which you can then combine into a selector box, and the other boss only dropping altered micro reactors and fragments, altered being the new element used by Lin. This piece of gear can have altered attack as a substat, along with the usual percentage elemental attack. 2.1 also introduced these repeatable research tasks that you can complete and exchange for additional currency or fragments for all types of gear, including the next new piece of gear introduced in 2.2, the Exoskeleton. The Exoskeleton was introduced in 2.2 along with the Miroria expansion project. The only supposed way to get it is from completing the new game mode called Origin of War, or 4-player bygone mode. This piece of gear is basically just another combat engine, with substats being able to have percentage elemental attack or damage. Now we know where to get all the gear, we can now talk about enhancing them, not to be confused with advancing. For enhancing gear, focus on the gloves first, then any piece that gets you attack, and finally the rest of the pieces you can get to the set bonus. The cost of each enhancement gets really expensive later on, so it is best to focus on the set bonus first. And most of you should already know by now, but gear enhancements are transferable, so you should just enhance whatever white, green, blue, or purple piece you have and transfer them to gold later. Also, if you messed up and enhanced multiple pieces of the same slot, you can recycle the gear to get your enhancement mats back. Speaking of recycling, there's also this method on Reddit, link in the description, that can get you a few hundred more crit in the early game by transferring your enhancements all into gloves and other pieces that get you attack while sacrificing survivability. Pretty useful if you're lacking that little bit of damage for bygone, but do know that this trick will decrease your CS and make your suppressor upgrades harder to achieve. Also, for the new gear pieces, all of them in CN besides the combat engine will use purple enhancement mats instead of blue, but there's no reason to save the blue ones, since purple ones have a different acquisition source, for example as a drop from Vera world bosses. Now that the simple common sense stuff are out of the way, let's talk about the actual thing that most of you are here for, the advancement guide. Gold gear can be advanced up to 5 times, giving it 5 stars with each advancement costing more and more XP. You can either use the XP crystals or by feeding the same type of gear to advance stars, with gold being worth 2,400 base XP each. If you feed an already starred piece of gear, all previously invested XP will be carried over at a 20% XP loss on top of the 2,400 base. You can also recycle gear into XP crystals, but do know that when you recycle, you will lose an additional 50% of the XP compared to feeding it directly. Only recycle low tier gear when it is late game and you run out of inventory space, or if you already have a perfect piece and you want the XP recycled and used for another slot, or if you accidentally used your enhancement mats on multiple gear of the same slot and want to get them back. Each advancement will randomly pick one out of the 4 substats and give it a stat boost, which is also randomly selected within a minimum and maximum range, with a uniform distribution. The range has been data mined for global and can be found here. Compared to the CN data mine ranges, we can see that the initial value and maximum upgrade got nerfed by 28%, while the minimum upgrade got buffed by about 14%, assuming global is still following CN with the uniform distribution. This means that it is a lot easier for global players to get usable gear, with one caveat being crit. Crit is the one stat that you must prioritize no matter what, especially on global with the nerfed maximum crit rolls. Going by the average crit roll of 819 on global versus 1015 on CN, we lose out on almost 1000 crit per piece of gear. With only gloves and boots being able to have the crit substat at the moment, this means we lose out on about 2000 crit on average compared to CN, considering 5 stars all rolled in. But we use the exact same crit formula. The formula for crit rate being your crit stat divided by your target's level multiplied by 2.666 minus 27, and all that divided by 100. And here are some in-game examples to prove that it is accurate for both global and CN. According to the formula, and given Bygone mod being capped at level 70 until floor 600, we would need about 16,000 crit to get to a 100% crit rate, which is fairly hard to achieve in global. So, with our newfound knowledge, what is considered a good piece of gear for us to save and potentially advance? For gloves and boots, as long as it has the crit substat, it is a good piece and you should save and lock it so you don't accidentally use it as fodder. For other pieces that can't have crit as a substat, you should prioritize the elemental attack of your chosen comp, followed by normal attack. And just to clarify, the attack stat basically boosts every elemental attack, but can't roll as high as a single elemental attack. Given the meta of this game dictating single element comps and eventual arrival of Lyn with the altered element copying the highest elemental attack stat, players should save and lock gear that has both the elemental attack and attack stat, so that at least 50% of the time, you roll a stat that benefits your damage. If a piece of gear has only attack, it's not good. If it only has your elemental attack, it can possibly be good, so you can save it for endgame gear gambling, but more on that later. Now, we break it down by roles on a team. For a DPS, or anybody in general, since solo content does kind of matter in this game, and you should always build a set of gear for DPS first no matter what your end goal is, you should look for your comp's elemental attack and the attack stat on your gear as substats, and you want all 5 stars to potentially roll into these stats only, besides gloves and boots. For these two, only crit matters, since your end goal is to roll all 5 advancement stars into it. For a healer, you pretty much do the same thing as the DPS, but you can be a bit more lenient on yourself since you're activating the Benediction Resonance and can't really do damage anyways. Now you may ask, but all the healing weapons are different elemental types. Shouldn't I prioritize all attack instead of elemental attack? Well, not really, since your heals are actually based off of the elemental attack stat of your currently active weapon and not the weapon that actually casted the heal. See this Coco heal for example. My character has more vault attack than Frost, so when I cast the heal, I heal for less compared to after the switch to Nemesis. Also, you may notice that these heals can actually crit. So yes, healers also need crit, which makes it dead simple. You just do the same thing as the DPS role when optimizing gear for healers. For tanks though, it's a bit different, since now HP and resistances are actually desirable, but offensive stats are still important. Since the 800% aggro from the Fortitude Resonance is based off of your damage dealt, you still need some attack stats to be able to pull aggro away from your attackers. So in the end, tank gear should just be suboptimal DPS gear, preferably with a couple stars rolled into HP and resistances. So make sure to save a set of quote-unquote bad DPS gear if you plan to play as a tank. Now, let's talk about the endgame gameplay loop with gear advancements. On CN, we got 5 whole gear presets that allow us to quickly switch to maybe one of each elemental build and a tank build. At this point in time, you should have a few fully built out sets optimized for each elemental comp. You then acquire a new piece of gear that has potential, attack and elemental attack on it. You feed it fodder or XP until it gets to 5 stars. Then you add up the relevant attack stats and see if it exceeds the current ones that you have in your sets. If it does, congratulations, you have improved your gear. Swap the new one in, unlock the old one, and wait for a new piece of gear with potential to show up, where you can then feed the old one to, and try to gamble for an even better piece of gear. If the piece was bad, then compare it with your tank set, and if it's still not an improvement, unlock it and wait for the next one. Once you actually get to this point though, you are only ever losing 20% of your XP every 5-star advancement you gamble on, so it's actually not that bad. Finally, let's talk briefly about advancements for future gears to come. Every piece of new gear up to the 2.2 update Exoskeleton requires this new type of XP material that can be acquired from various sources, such as from raids and Origin of War. Think XP crystals, but different. You can also feed the same type of gear for XP the same way as regular gear. Also, as mentioned earlier, these new pieces of gear can all roll some sort of percentage substat on top of the basic possible substats on regular gear, be it percentage increase in elemental attack or resistance, HP, or even crit rate and elemental damage. These substats make the new pieces very powerful, especially when you have already min-maxed your existing basic 8 pieces of gear. And the fact that they don't have a min-max roll range, for example, always getting 2% elemental attack increase per roll, makes them even better. The problem is just getting lucky and acquiring one with perfect substats, with all 4 being relevant to your elemental comp. For example, if you're running Vault comp, a perfect piece would have percentage vault attack, percentage vault damage, flat vault attack, and attack. So this way, whichever substat you end up rolling into would benefit you. However, more possible substats coupled with the fact that these pieces are elemental specific means getting the right elemental stats on the same elemental piece is super hard, and will be your endgame grind. This is where the stat locker comes in to help. The stat locker is a one-use item that allows you to block a stat from receiving a star advancement one time, with the main acquisition source being 1 per week from completing the weekly activity bar and additional sources shown here. You can use it on regular gear and make it so every advancement has a 2 out of 3 chance of getting a desired roll instead of the usual 2 out of 4, but it being so scarce makes it wise for you to save it for the new gear pieces, since if you get a new piece with 3 out of 4 desired substats, consuming 5 stat lockers will guarantee you a perfect endgame piece with every substat rolling into an offensive stat for your elemental comp. That's it for the gear guide. If you learned something from it, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more, and let me know in the comments below what guide you want to see next. Hopefully it won't take another month.